Thanks, John. Thanks, John. Appreciate it. Playing in a band is great. You know, you get to see the country, play great theaters, great clubs, meet a lot of amazing people, travel around the world. But the most frustrating and challenging thing I think about playing in a band is when your gigs happen at the same time as your favorite sports teams being in the postseason, right? Playing important games. And I remember we were actually playing in Kitchener-Waterloo at the Volcano, I think, during the 1993 World Series. 92, we were actually traveling across Canada. So we would plan our route to be close to whatever bar or tavern happened to be in the nearest Rocky Mountain town as we were traveling. I remember showing up and finding out that Ed Sprague had hit the home run to beat Atlanta at a crappy little pub in Revelstoke, British Columbia, but just making sure we knew what was going on. But in 93, one of the games, we were playing at the Volcano, and it was the 15-14 game, which Todd, I think, will talk about a little bit. But I would have people come up to me during the set and give me the score. And so we were playing the show, and it was going really well. But the game was so preposterous, and it kept changing leads, and the Phillies would score 5 runs, and the Jays would come back. And just as we finished our last song, the person whom I had entrusted to be watching the TV while we were playing our show came up to tell us that the Jays had won 15-14 inexplicably. And then a few days later, during Game 6, the famous Joe Carter home run, we delayed going on stage for as long as we could. And finally, stage time, so we had to go take the stage. And the game was in the later innings. We didn't know what the result was. And just as Joe Carter hit his walk-off home run, we finished playing one of our songs. The person came up to the stage and told us, and it was just such a feeling of elation. And I remember the song that we played after we found out that Joe Carter had hit the home run to win the World Series in 1993 was probably the greatest version of any song we'd ever played, because we were so thrilled and so excited. My friends during that moment, not to talk too much about rock and roll, but my friends during our set had gone to the church across the street from the club and had climbed the steps where they decided to smoke a joint. And they were a little stoned, and they listened to us play one of our songs. And just as we finished that song, they heard an enormous applause that poured up and down the streets of Guelph. And they thought, well, the crowd loved that song, but it was actually cheering from all the bars after Carter had hit his home run. So my life in music has been inextricably tied with baseball, and particularly the era in which Todd played and pitched for the Jays. If you were ever to make a film about a young emotional ball player who rallies himself through promise, really, to rise to the major leagues and stays in the big leagues, works his way through a colorful, decorated career before sliding into his post-career life, you'd almost certainly cast Todd in that role. Tall, composed, and seemingly born under a baseball cap, which really he nearly was, having been taught by his dad, Mel Stottlemyre, his pitching coach and legend, New York Yankees legend. He's known around here, obviously, best known perhaps for being a linchpin of the Jays World Series teams in 92, 93. And while he was part of a colorful ensemble, to say the least, that included Joe Carter, Tony Fernandez, Dave Winfield, Roberto Alomar, his presence as a pitching constant, he joined the organization in 1988. It was important because it was a rotation that was shuffled in and out, Pat Gillick bringing people in and out. But I think Todd's rugged determination and his brilliance on the mound, it can't be underestimated when it comes to providing that constant over the course of those teams. He's really a link between some of the most famous moments in Blue Jays history, whether it's Alomar's home run in 92 in Oakland, Joe Carter's walk-off, of course, and that wild October 20th game, the 15-14 game. And we're thrilled to have him here. So without further ado, Todd Stottlemyre. So many memories, so many images come to mind when. So welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Here we are in a beer house.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. I always like to kind of go back to the beginning if we can when talking about the game. Do you have a early prescient memory of the game as a kid, or the light turning on for you?
Well, I'll say this, that, growing up in a place called Yankee Stadium, As the game is different today than when I grew up inside the game, and not as a player, but as a player's son, right? And a player's son back in the mid '60s, early '70s was the opportunity to go to work with dad,
Right.
and it was so much different. It was so, and I pinch myself today because what a blessing it was that, and during that time, I called Monument Park for my brothers and I. That was monkey bars, right? So it was literally our playground, and we roamed the stadium, and we wore our Yankee uniforms to the stadium every day, and we went to work with dad every day. And when I think back on those times, it's pretty crazy that I'd be standing in the outfield grass with a guy by the name of Mickey Mantle. Pretty cool, right? And Yogi Berra was my father's first manager. And then what I didn't know back then was that from the time I was born, 40 years later, I would celebrate my 40th birthday with Yogi Berra celebrating his 80th birthday in Montclair, New Jersey. And the reason I share that with you is because that was truly the way it was. It was those teams were family. And back in the day, they had Sundays off, double headers on Saturdays, Sundays off, and the Yankees families would come together, and all of the memories of that and that environment, and growing up in that environment really led to an inspiration. And the inspiration was, and I remember I was like, man, my dad has got the coolest job in the world, right? He plays a game, he calls it work, they pay him, and they cheer for him when he does good. I'm like, I'd like to have that job someday. And
what do they do when he doesn't do good?
Well, I had more of those. But, it was awesome, and the dream really, started back in Yankee Stadium, and then that dream really became an obsession, and it wasn't overnight. It was progress, and as we grew and as we went through Little League baseball and from Yankee Stadium to the Little League ball fields, right, to middle school to high school, and then my senior year in high school. Where I wasn't even good enough to pitch on my high school baseball team until I was a senior. So I wasn't a pitcher. I was just a baseball player and a junkie, and had the obsession and had this whole goal and dream. But I thought I was going to college as a middle infielder, and my senior year, my brother was a year ahead of me. When he left high school, I said to the coach, I said, if we need another pitcher, I said, I can probably throw strikes. And I said, and he was like, well, we'll check and see how you do. And I went on to break every school record, not having any idea or concept that was resting somewhere inside of me, waiting for the opportunity.
So you at that point, you're pretty much bringing the heat, right? You've got obviously a lively fastball. At what point did you feel like you became a pitcher? And was there somebody along the line in those early days that showed you that way beyond your father, or a mentor or a coach?
Yeah, it took me a while. Cito Gaston was like a father figure to me here, and what I mean by that is I was so young, and for anybody that remembers me as a player in Toronto, it was going to be a colorful experience, right? We were either going to win or we were going to fight, and there was no in-betweens, right? And I was the hockey player in a baseball uniform. I had that mentality, and so a lot of growing up, a lot of maturing as a man, as a person, and at the same time I'm fighting all of this promise and all of the things and all of the media and press and the promise that they had for me. Wasn't really happening. I was a 500 pitcher on championship clubs. It's almost hard to do. I would say that the clubs I played on in Toronto was nothing more than, for me, it was a growing process. I'm grateful. I'm thankful. When I talk about the World Series teams, I talk about that people came from multiple countries around the world, but we all felt Canadian and the spirit. Because no one else in baseball, by the way, wanted Toronto to win. It was kind of like that team in another country taken over the American pastime, you know, and it was like, and we had, you know, we came from Venezuela and the Dominican Republic. We came from, I think we had one player from Canada, and we came from the United States, but we all felt the sense of pride of being not only from Toronto, but being the Canadian team.
Was that something that was cultivated among the coaching staff there, that sort of outsider kind of status? Was that a bit of sandpaper that was provided to allow you guys to grind against that, to create the spark, which allowed you to be a great team, do you think? Because I know as fans, we felt that from 85 on all the way up, that we were on the other side of the fence for a long time.
Yeah, you know, I mean, you guys know ESPN didn't like the Toronto Blue Jays or the Montreal Expos. They would give them very limited time, and you know, there's something called TV revenue, and from a fan standpoint or a media standpoint, look, I'm beating up the country I came from. But no one, like the TV revenue to see somebody like the Montreal Expos or the Toronto Blue Jays in a World Series.
And it's still like that in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah,
Boston
for
and the
sure.
Yankees, yeah.
And you know, and to me, you should take pride in it. It's like, it's great, you know. I mean, I mean, for me, it was like anytime I walked into a stadium or put on a uniform, it's awesome being the guy or the team that no one wants to win, and yet go win. And so it's pretty incredible.
Can you describe for us your first start in the majors?
Really good for 4 innings and then a disaster.
Where was it? And well, who's the first batter you faced?
Well, you know, it's crazy. I don't remember the first batter. You know, we opened up in Kansas City in 1988. And I do remember this, that they brought me in for 1 inning to get my feet wet. I was the 5th starter on the club. And in that 1 inning, I didn't give up any runs, but I did give up a hit to a guy by the name of George Brett. And I threw him a changeup, and I didn't even really have a changeup, so I think I made it up. They told me throw a changeup. I'm like, I don't know if I have one of those, but, and I'm like, so I'll throw it, and I think he hit a double off the wall, and I'm like, you know.
Welcome to the bigs.
And then, yeah, and then I remember it was like, even after hanging out with guys like Mickey Mantle and Thurman Munson, I used to go fishing with Thurman Munson and the Bobby Mercers, and I could go on and on and on, but even after growing up and living that environment, I was just like everyone else. Their first pitch, their first start, I was so nervous. I remember in Kansas City, I came in from the bullpen and I'm throwing from the stretch and my back leg is shaking. I couldn't get it. And you know, and I was so nervous and so tight, I couldn't swallow. It's like my lips were like stuck together, and I'm like, wow, this is awesome. And then my first start was against the 1987 world champion Minnesota Twins in the Metrodome. And I remember they telling me, they're like, Todd, it's, you know, and it was their opening day. So it was their home opener, was my first start. Right. And they'd coming off a World Series, and they're like, Todd, you're not going to be able to hear. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. And there's this place called the Metrodome. I'd never been in it. And I'm like, okay, whatever. And I'm like, I remember taking the mound, and I was like, oh, dear God, you know, what have I gotten myself into? But it was crazy. After 4 innings, I think I'd given up 1 hit. I think the score was 0-0. I'd punched out 9 guys in 4 innings.
Your catcher is whom?
Pat Borders.
Okay.
Yeah. And then in the 5th inning, and by the way, I'm pitching against the Cy Young Award winner for the world champion Minnesota Twins in their home opener after Frank Viola, right? I'm like, man, that's a good draw there, right? It's like, let's get this rookie, let's get him, let's get his feet wet. And I remember the 5th inning, a guy by the name of Gladden came up in the 5th. He hit a double, and that place erupted. Like, I mean, when I say erupted, that place went, I mean, every seat, it was sold out. It was like this wave, but the sound in that place because of the dome and the whole deal, I mean, it was crazy. And then I remember there was a guy coming to the plate by the name of Kirby Puckett. And Borders came to the mound, and he's screaming, and I can't hear him.
Wow.
I mean, he's literally screaming, and I got to watch my language. My wife is here, All right, guys.
I'm sure she's never heard you swear.
All right. But Borders is yelling at me, you got to get the ball in on this guy. And I'm like, I can't. I'm like, dude, I can't hear you, man. And we're yelling, and there's so much noise. And then Borders finally, are you guys okay if I say one cuss word today? Sean, are you okay? Yeah. I'm just going to say one, just because you'll miss the point, right? Borders is yelling, and he finally says, if you don't get the effing, I won't say it, ball in on this guy, he's going to take you deep. I'm like, that's awesome psychology from my catcher.
Very tactful.
I'm like, thanks, bro. You got a lot of confidence in me, I see. And as it turned out, I didn't get out of the fifth inning. But it was incredible. And it was kind of, that game was really kind of like a reflection of how I pitched here. I would have moments of brilliance, and then the polar opposite, very difficult time. And it was because of youth and immaturity and all the things. And, you know, I'm playing with a club that is expected to win from the people in Toronto and from the baseball world. Here I'm a young guy, and I'm trying to get all of this.
Well, to put it in historical context too, you're starting in '88 after the collapse of '87, where, you know, the Jays had an incredible team in '87, and we all thought that they were going to walk, and then they have that terrible last 10 games that last week against Detroit, and they collapse and they lose. So you're coming in at a time where it's like, you know, you're a young kid, maybe this is our way to the promise of the future. And then, you know, I talked in the beginning about you kind of being a constant. Those years from '88 to '91, you know, there was a lot of ups and downs and a lot of unfulfilled promise, a lot of unrequited with '89 and '91 as well. Can you talk about what it was like to sort of suffer through that time before glory eventually?
Well, I got to tell you guys the '89 story because, you know, in '88 they finally sent me back to AAA August 1st, and it was so funny. It was like, I was like, oh, thank God I can get out of here because, you know, I was probably the worst pitcher in baseball, and, you know, I come with all of this promise, and people are like, man, who is this guy, right? And then the conversations that were developed in my youth where this guy's not like his father, and he's not in, you know, that was really becoming a big deal. And so when I went to AAA, it was like, man, you know, you have this sense that, you know, you can dominate AAA, and I did, and I dominated. And then I remember when I got called back, and Jimmy Williams said to me, he said, Todd, he says, there's no difference, man. We just need you to be you. And I'm like, yeah, it seems like a big difference to me. But and then in September, I didn't pitch much, but they brought me in another bullpen a few times. And then Pat Gillick actually, last day of the season, says, hey, Todd, we want you to go to winter ball. And I'm like, I just had a terrible season. I wasn't thinking about playing baseball. I was thinking about going home, hunting and fishing with my father and my brother. I wanted to get away. And I was like, okay. I said, okay. And he says, look, we need you to go learn. Now, I'm 22. And, you know, and after having the goal of getting to the big leagues and doing that whole deal, now once you get there, now they're asking me, will you go to winter ball? And they didn't say, will you go? They said, the only way you make our club next year is if you go to winter ball and you learn to develop a new pitch. So I had to go develop a whole new pitch as a major league pitcher just to make the club the next year. So I was thinking winter ball, like Arizona, Florida, you know, somewhere would have been awesome. And I said, well, where am I going to go? And they said, Barquisimeto, Venezuela. I still can't spell Barquisimeto. I don't ever want to learn how. And I went to Venezuela in the middle of a presidential election, and it was crazy.
Wow.
But they sent Borders. I'm like, they sent him to catch me. I'm like, too bad for you. You know? And it was fun. And without Borders being there, it would have been crazy. But I remember when I get to Venezuela, right, they take your passport. Like, there's no, you're not escaping. And I remember after the first night, I said to Borders, I said, man, we got to break out of this. Like, I'm thinking of like jailbreak. I go, we got to get the hell out of here.
Where are you living down there? Like, what? Just
in a hotel. Yeah. And every morning it was like they played the salsa, you know, and I ended up punching the deal. And you guys can imagine what happened. But I tore the speakers out of the wall. I was like, I can't take it anymore. But anyways, 1989 to make the club. And
Sorry,
like May 15th.
What's the pitch you had to learn to throw?
I had to learn how to throw a slider.
Okay.
Yeah, they wanted me to learn. I was a power pitcher. I could throw my curveball over the plate about one every 3 or 4 times, right? Not very good. And they were like, man, we need you to learn how to throw a breaking ball first strike. They thought that I was built for a slider, and they were right. So I came back, I made the club, and then they fired Jimmy Williams. I remember I was with Borders, we were roommates, and I said, man, and I really liked Jimmy, and I had a lot of respect for Jimmy Williams. But I remember I said, man, maybe, and I was kind of a swing guy, and they would fit me in, and they would say, and I remember saying to Borders at our apartment, maybe I'll finally start getting more time. I got a lot more time in AAA because they sent me to AAA. Cito Gaston's first meeting and first decision, and it wasn't his decision, but his first move was to send me to AAA. And I remember Cito didn't like sending me down because it was his first day as a manager, but I went down mad, by the way. And I remember calling my dad, and he was and I really want to tell this story for you guys, but I remember calling my dad, and you might not know the story, but I called my dad. I said, Dad, I just got sent back down to AAA, and man, I was mad, and I was complaining, and I was blaming. I said, Dad, I don't know about these people up here in Canada. I said, they're a hockey country. I don't know if they even know what the hell they're doing with baseball, I was blaming the team, the country, the sport. I blamed everything. And my dad said something to me that day that changed me, and he says, and he was a pitching coach of the New York Mets. He said, man, we'd love to have you as a starting pitcher here in New York. And I was like, yes. And he goes, but not the way you're pitching right now. And I was like, wow. Like, truth does hurt, right? And I remember saying to Dad, I said, Dad, is Mom around, by the way? Because maybe she'll buy into this whole Canadian theme I got going on, And I went to AAA, and I remember that night, I got to tell you, I was at a place where I was so vulnerable. I started to wonder if everybody else was right, the critics were right. I wasn't like my father. I'll never amount to anything in this whole deal. And I started to wonder, what am I going to do if this thing doesn't work out? And I just made the decision to go all in. And little did I know I'd get called back 1 month later, and that I would pitch Game 2 of the 1989 playoffs against the Oakland A's. Like, I couldn't even have dreamed that. And then to go on and to be a part of championship clubs and to see this team, probably the worst year, guys, is when you think about it, when you look back, is 1991. We killed the Minnesota Twins all year long, and they crushed us in the playoffs first round. And we were all like, we felt like we just got run over by a bus. And I remember when we all left bitter. We went home bitter that year, and we came back to spring training on a mission. And it was like day one. It wasn't about getting to a World Series. It was about winning a championship, and everybody really came together.
You talk. I want to talk about those teams, but just to touch on something that I think as people on the other side of it don't realize and don't process is the burden of promise. And I get a sense that was something, even though you had great mentors and your dad and Cito and learning from the great Yankee teams, it was something you had to figure out yourself. Would you agree with that?
For sure. I tell people now, I'm a lot better pitcher and baseball guy now, watching it on TV. Like the game looks so simple. And yet, when you're out there, and you can, and I think it's with anything in life, right? We can all go read a book, a how-to book, but until you do it and apply it and learn and go through the ups and downs of it, it's like, and I had to do that. And if I had one regret, and I'm not a person that has regrets, or I don't spend a lot of time looking in the rearview mirror and saying, well, I wish I'd have done this, I wish I'd have done that. But if I had one regret about my career is I became and started to fulfill that promise after I left Toronto. And I really wish that if I had one thing that I could change is that I would have became the pitcher that I did become. I would have loved to pitch that way for the Toronto Blue Jays. Because Toronto is a special place, to me in my heart. And my 11-year-old son, man, it's like his favorite team is the Toronto Blue Jays. I think that's the coolest thing in the world, and he loves the Blue Jays. And he wants to come up, and someday I'm going to bring him up, take him to the stadium, and that whole deal. But and you know, Toronto will always be a special place. Those World Series rings, they have dominance over the other World Series ring that I have as part of the collection. There's a lot of meaning. There's a lot, and it was, for me, it was like so much of the city, and I was growing up and going through everything that I went through. But if I didn't go through it, I would have never become what I became, and you know, if I would have never persisted, you know. So
92 is remarkable in a way because it was a real journey in terms of, like, you guys had a bunch of losing streaks in there. Whew. And you know, a lot of talent obviously, and then final self-realization at the end. But so when you go back and you think about the anatomy of that season, what did you learn about a team that achieves what it achieves through what it went through that year?
You know, we had a big lead, and we squandered the lead late in August. I don't know if you guys remember. We gave up our lead. We had about an 8-10 game lead. We just threw it away, and we were playing bad. And I hit a personal streak too, that for 3 or 4 starts I was getting killed. I mean, I wasn't getting through the 5th inning, and I was giving up 7, 8, 9, 10 runs, and just getting beat all over the ballpark. And you know, I remember there was 2 things there was a movement that happened in August of 92. And one was another call to my father. And I remember calling my dad, and there's 2 quick stories, and I won't spend too much time here, but I recalled Dad, and I said, Dad, I said, I make a good pitch, they're getting hits. I make a bad pitch, they're hitting home runs. And I'm like, man, I stink. And I said, and I can't figure out, it's like, I go, I'm not even getting through he goes, I know, I've been watching on the highlights. And he says, Todd, you think you're making good pitches, but you're actually not. He says, everything is elevated in the strike zone, and those pitches you think are good are jamming guys. These guys are so good, so strong, they're splashing balls so you think it's a good pitch, and then you make a bad pitch out over the plate, and somebody's taking you deep for a 3-run homer. And I'm like, yeah, that's it. That's my games. And he says, he goes, Todd, he says, he goes, I want you in between starts to get the game simple for you again. He goes, I want you to think about just staying back, finish strong, and think down in the strike zone. I'm like, I can do that. And he goes, and I want you to do one other thing for me. I want you to write KISS, KISS, on the inside of the bill of your hat. And I'm like, KISS? He goes, yeah, keep it simple, stupid. He goes, and every time the game gets confusing or there's whatever, I want you to take your hat off. I want you to look at that. And what KISS means to you is stay back, finish strong, think down in the strike zone. And at the same time that I had this conversation with my father, Cito Gaston had a locker room meeting. And by the way, guys, Cito didn't have a lot of locker room meetings. So when he did, and when Cito had a meeting, it was like you could hear a pin drop. Everybody was listening. And I remember he said these things, and that message that he told us in 1992, I keep with me today, and I use at every part of my business. He says, number 1, you got to know your strengths. So each one of you guys in this room, you have to know what your strengths are. He says, number 2, you have to know the strength of your teammates. You need to understand what they're capable of and what they're not capable of. And he goes, and number 3, guys, you need to know the strengths and weaknesses of your competition. He goes, if you can master those 3 things, the talent that is sitting in this locker room right now will become a world championship team. I'll never forget that speech. He turned around and walked out of the locker room. And we were all sitting around like, man, that is so right.
That's middle of August, around that time when you're floundering. Wow.
Same time I have the conversation with my father, my next start, I throw a 1-hit shutout against the White Sox in Chicago. We go on a winning streak and then just roll right through the playoffs and into the World Series. Crazy.
There are 2 great sporting moments that I think changed the course of sporting and cultural history in our country. One was when Paul Henderson scored against the Russians in 1972. The other time was when Roberto Alomar hits the homer off Dennis Eckersley. Where were you, and what were your impressions, and what was that day like, and did you feel like something had changed afterwards?
Yeah, the sense of we were going to win. And you know, it wasn't just Robbie hitting a home run. It's who he hit the home run off of.
True, and you came back in that game as well. You were down, and then.
So I mean, Eckersley's in the game, right? So he's the closer. But you know, if you think back to 1989, and the Toronto Blue Jays and the Oakland A's, that became a rivalry, right? And they were the beast in the West, and we were the proclaimed beast in the East, and they just would, and I had a very tough time pitching against the A's, man. And,
They had some good hitters,
oh,
Todd.
Lord. And they were all like 250 pounds and like fullbacks, and hit the ball like 9 miles. But it wasn't just the home run and the spirit of that game and what it did, but it was who we did it against and the pitcher. Because Eckersley had our number. And look, I would tell you, we hated him. Like, we couldn't stand him. And, and Ricky Henderson was running, if you walked Ricky, it was like a home run because he was going to steal second, steal third, and somebody was going to hit a stinking pop-up and he was going to score.
Well, and they were showboats, too.
It was
they rubbed your face.
They had, and I learned something about Eckersley that I didn't know because I became his teammate. And it was crazy, but when Robbie hit that home run, I can still see Robbie's, I can still see it, right? Can you picture it? It's crazy, right? And I was in the dugout, and we were like sitting on the top step there, and it was like at that moment, though, there was this sense that came over the club that we are going to win this whole thing. Like, this, not just this game and not just this series, but we're going to become world champs. And it was a sense of everything that we'd worked for is this thing is going to happen.
Well, the story, whether it's mythological or not, is after the home run, you're going wild and you're celebrating, but immediately everybody's attention turns to Eckersley and you're up on the top step, like pointing at him. And
yeah, that was probably the case. Like, we got you finally, right?
Yeah.
And what was great was, I became Eckersley's teammate in 1995, actually, when I went from Toronto to the Oakland A's. I remember it was the year of after the, I don't mean to skip around here on you, but it was, remember we walked and went on strike, and then there was no playoffs, and then there was a lockout, and baseball had taken a beating. I went to Homestead, Florida for spring training. It was where free agents went when they didn't have a team, and I didn't have a team. I remember my agent called me and they said, the Oakland A's want you. I said, I'll go anywhere in baseball, but I am not playing for the Oakland A's. I hated them, even to that point. I was like, you just became where you hated these guys. And then my agent says, Todd, there's no one else that wants you. I said, Oakland's going to be a great spot for me. And I'm in a pitchers meeting with Dave Duncan, all of the pitchers, right? Dave Duncan was the master. And I remember he was talking about fear, he was just talking, the pitchers were, and he had this meeting, and he looked at Eck, and he said, Eck, and he was kind of like, what drives you, what motivates you? And Eckersley, and it's the first time I've been around, and I hated this guy. By the way, I'm looking at him in this pitchers meeting, really not, I'm going to have to figure out a way to like this guy. And if he saves some games for me, I'll figure it out. But, and I remember him saying that, and Eck, he was always so cool out there. Like, you wanted to just punch him, and Eck, I remember him saying, when I come into a game in the 9th inning, he goes, fear. And he goes, I'm scared to death. I'm like, what? Like, this guy that looks like when you watch him pitch, he doesn't look scared. It's like he's the coolest guy in the world. Like, if you're an opposing team, you just want to knock him out. He goes, but I took the fear and used it as motivation. And because of it, I got, what would happen is I would get more aggressive. And as I got more aggressive, it was like this other person showed up, this alter ego. And that became Dennis Eckersley, the closer in a game. And I had two thoughts. Number one, it was like, first thought was like, oh my God, this guy's going to come in behind me scared to death. And I was like, I don't know about that. And then number two was like, wow, at that moment I was like, I love this guy. Because like in the emotion, and I was just talking about it earlier in an interview earlier in the week, it's like sometimes athletes emotionally do things because they're caught up in the emotion of a game, of the sport, and it's not always really them. They might look like, like George Bell. I remember George Bell, and George Bell was the guy that hated the media. I don't know. I don't want to say he hated them, but there was a language thing, and sometimes there was whatever. But I would tell you something about George Bell is he was the greatest teammate. If George Bell went 4 for 4 and our team lost, he was miserable. If George Bell went 0 for 4 and looked terrible at the plate, and the Blue Jays won, happiest guy on the team bus. And he was the ultimate team player, and it's like, but you can see because of maybe how somebody acts or what they say in a moment, in an emotional time, on an outburst or something, you start making and creating what you think about that person. But then off the field, they're a completely different person.
Right, and I'm sure it's a fine balance too, measuring that emotion versus self-containment, right? And just putting enough coal into the furnace as opposed to letting it catch on fire. So 92, you're in the World Series and you win the World Series, and it's where the country explodes. And I remember going across the country, and every town you went in across the country. And David Cohn had a good set during the parade. I think in '93 he said, "You don't have to be Canadian to feel the spirit of Canada," which is beautifully put. Right. But you're coming back in '93, and was that? Did you feel like you had to wipe the chalkboard clean and start over again, or were you using the momentum of that success going into that next season? Or did it complicate things almost, success?
What's crazy is spring training in '93. It was like, once again, it was day one. It was like, we didn't want to give up the title. It was like, okay, we just won a world championship. So we get to be, in 1993, we get to be the 1992 world champion Blue Jays that everyone's going to compete against in '93, right? But we went to spring training, and it was like, winning was so fun. We wanted to win again. And it was like, no one had lost. We didn't lose the edge, right? Now, here's what I will tell you is that the switch from Winfield in '92 to Molitor in '93, I don't know whoever was the architect of that.
Well, it must
Pat
have been
Gillett, right?
Must have been Pat Gillett, yeah.
Genius. And it's not like Winfield couldn't have come back and contributed the same way. That's not the case. Molitor brought something that what Winfield brought in '92, Molitor brought in 1993.
What was that quality exactly?
And it's like this leadership of playing and doing the game, doing and playing the game the right way. And I look, if you were in the locker room during a Toronto Blue Jays game, and in 1992, you pray Winfield doesn't walk in and look at you and say, "What are you doing inside this locker room?" The team and the game is out there. And I remember Molitor, he brought it in a different way, but Molitor never missed batting practice. If there was infield, he never missed being on the field, even though he was the designated hitter. He was the first guy at stretching. And it was like he brought this sense of professionalism. Not that the club needed professionalism, but a way of, we show up, we've got a job, we've got a responsibility, and it was an all-in deal. And it was like, it was genius. The architect of that was genius.
Well, and Gillick obviously found two players who were brilliantly gifted, but hungry too.
Hungry, yeah.
Because they hadn't won in their
that's right.
careers.
Yeah, they were hungry, and they were respected by the guys that were on the Blue Jay teams. And even though we had won, we had a tremendous amount of respect for Paul Molitor when he came.
What about the staff? Because the staff changes as well over the course of those 2 years.
Yeah, well, it was like when somebody went, somebody better showed up. I mean, it was pretty crazy. I remember when Juan Guzman came. I was like, geez, and then he won 10 in a row, and it's like, man, this guy's the best guy in the staff.
Right.
And I go, what was he doing in AAA a month ago? I mean, it was pretty crazy. But I would tell you that when you look at winning teams, somebody shows up that you never expected that was going to be a part of the club. And Juan Guzman was.
Interesting.
And look at Pat Hinken. He was just coming up and developing, and look what he became.
Well, and even the Ward Henke.
Oh, good Lord, was that awesome? Or what?
Right, and Henke carries you in '92, and then '93, all of a sudden, Ward is just he had that.
And those two guys pitching together when they were on the same staff, and as a starting pitcher, you did everything you could to hold that team to where if we were winning after 6, we won the game. I mean, you can go back and look statistically, right? From the 7th to the 9th, we didn't lose games. So if we were winning in the 6th, we won the game. And having Ward and Hankey in that bullpen, it was like they weren't just great. It was kind of like they were breathing down the left field wall to get into the game. Like, man, if they didn't get in the game, they were mad. You know, like if you are a starting pitcher and you accidentally pitched a complete game, they're like mad at you. I'm like, what's wrong with you guys? I gave you a day off. I don't want a day off. I'm like, geez, excuse me. I'll leave the bases loaded for you next time with no one out. You know, they wanted in, and you know what? They had that mentality, and it is a big deal. It was a big reason why we won. Those two guys are a big reason why we were winners.
Looking back, are you grateful that I mean, everybody wants to have success at whatever point in their career, but be grateful that it happened when it did, as opposed to, because a lot of people, you know, the adage is when players win early, when they win a championship in their first season, they just think they're going to win a championship every year they play. It arrived at an interesting time for you, having had that back end, and then the years after as well, when there wasn't as much success. But are you grateful that the fruit was ripe when you were able to have that success at that time?
For sure. It did personally, for me, it did a lot, because when you play on a championship club, the other clubs, they want people who had won to be a part. So it was like, you know, I was later in my career, after I left Toronto, in 1996, I'm with the St. Louis Cardinals. They're trying to build a team to win. They bring me over as being one of those pieces. In 1998, the Cardinals, in my third year there, we were out of the race, and it was like my name was everywhere, all the teams that were winning, because this guy has been on winning teams. He's a winner, he's a fighter, and all of these things. And so I ended up going to the Texas Rangers and then playing in the playoffs, and then in 1999 go to Arizona, because we had a very competitive owner called Jerry Colangelo, wanted to build a winner. And I remember that winter I was a free agent, and my agent called and he says, the owner of the Arizona Diamondbacks would love to meet with you. And I'm like, dude, they lost 100 games in 1998. I mean, what are we going to talk about, right? I win. He's a loser, That was my mindset. He goes, no, Todd, he goes, this guy really wants to build a winner. And I'm like, yeah, but he lost 100 games. I go, look, I'm not going to be around forever. And I want to go somewhere where they're going to be focused on winning. And then my agent said, look, it'll be a great vacation. They're taking care of it. I said, all right, cool, I'll go. And I went and I spent the day with Jerry Colangelo. And I was like, wow. I mean, this guy, the fire, the intensity in his eyes. Yeah. And it was crazy, because he was the owner, I was the player. It was like looking into the mirror. It was like we'd rather fight than lose. And I was like, I want to play for this guy. And then, they made a massive offer that I couldn't believe, and I couldn't believe what was going on in the sport of baseball and the money that they were paying these guys. And here I was now, and they're trying to throw all this money, and I was like, man, don't they know I'm just not that good? Like, what the hell is wrong with you guys? You guys that stupid? But. Anyways, I ended up, and then he was like, you're the key to me getting Randy Johnson. I go, I'm the key. And I was like, he goes, look, I need somebody to show Randy that we're going to be. And so he signed me, then he went out and signed Randy, and he signed a guy by the name of Steve Fitt, and it went on and on and on. And I was like, oh, man. And we won fast there.
Yeah. Well, the Jays helped you get paid, really, ultimately, at the end.
Yeah. Everything I did in Toronto, I reaped benefit of playing on championship clubs. Right. Like, I was the beneficiary of all of the growth. Like I say, I wish, like, the way I pitched in St. Louis, and the way I pitched in Texas, and the way I pitched in Oakland after I left Toronto, I wish I would have had those years in Toronto. But it's like, hey, it is what it is. I remember pitching against Toronto for the first time, though, in '95, and it was in Oakland, and Stewart was my teammate, so we both went from Toronto to back. He was going back to Oakland, and I was, joining in Oakland, and early the Jays had me down, like, I don't know, 2-1 or 3-1 or something like that in the first couple of innings. And Dave said to me, he says, you're going to be really mad after this game if you don't get to work. And, you know, and my mind just, and I was like, yeah, man, I got to show these guys they made a mistake. And I ended up punching out 10 that day, and we won. I had dinner with Cito Gaston afterwards. He was like, wow. He goes, you were awesome out there today. And that year, I really began to develop. And there's a lot of things. The 93 World Series had a lot to do with me and my mindset and controlling myself. Had a lot to do with it.
And that helped you prepare then? Those experiences helped you prepare for what was ultimately like the twilight of your career. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the 93 year, you know, and that whole shakeup with Mayor Rendell. Anybody remember that? Mayor Rendell? Man, you guys are being so nice. But that whole thing where, you know, Mayor Rendell, Philadelphia, and the whole deal. Yeah, you remember that guy? Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Do you want to explain the story to those who...
So I go in, Cito announces I'm pitching Game 4 of the World Series. I'm the starter, and you go in the day before, and I walk in to do with Howard Starkman. I'm gonna do my pregame for the next day. They do this whole interview thing, and you got national media everywhere, and they're like, they just start. Mayor Rendell says the Blue Jays are throwing the series because they're starting you. I'm like, what? Oh my goodness. And it's like all this media is everywhere. And then they said he can't even believe you're going to be the starting pitcher because the mayor said he could hit you. And I'm like, well, and then I was like, and Howard Starkman is like, Todd, don't answer that question. Right? And I said, well, tell that son of a bitch to get his helmet and come on down here. And then it broke, man. The second I called, you know, and it was like, then it was chaotic. And it went back, and by the time I got to pitch in Game 4 I was worn out emotionally because of all this interaction that was going on, you know. And what's funny about the 93 World Series is I remember I'm pitching, Green is the opposing pitcher, and he was great, man, but he's having the same problem I am. The home plate umpire refuses to call a strike. And it was like, and I walked. Right, I remember when I went to hit and he walked, I got down to first base and Kruk looked at me, he goes, bro, he says, you're not going to believe the score of this game. And I said, what do you say? He goes, it's going to be like 14-13.
He knew.
I'm like, what? He goes, that guy behind the home plate, dude, he ain't calling any strikes. He goes, we're going to be center and ball. I'm like, oh, good Lord, right? And then, you know, of course, I decided to, on the next hit, to try to take third base. And it was like,
can you look?
Good stuff.
Well, it's fun. I mean, you probably get asked about that a lot, but you know, when I think about it, well, it was so daring, and it's like it was in a way very charming way. I mean, like, and I think it expressed a kind of joy, and maybe a little foolhardy, but you really embodied the spirit, I think, of what you represented as an athlete. Can you see it like that, or do you still think to yourself, oh man, what was I doing?
No, you know what? I would do it all over again.
Yeah, good.
I just wouldn't have put the damn jacket on, right?
Yeah.
And you know what's so funny is Lenny Dykstra is the center fielder. We know he had a terrible arm.
Yes.
Right? Like terrible. Like my 11-year-old could throw. Sorry, Lenny, but he just didn't have a good. Now he had great speed, great center fielder. Mm-hmm. He was a great offensive player, great base, all those things. But his arm was his one weakness. Mm. So they were talking, you know, the meetings before the games and the whole deal. You know, and they're going over the strengths and weaknesses of everyone, and they were just talking about, hey, guys, when you get on base now, any ball hit the center, you got to look. And so, you know, I'm on first base, and you know, base hit up the middle, and I can still remember, man, it was so fun. All right, so I kind of go coasting into second base like I'm gonna stop, and the ball is almost to Lenny, and he's looking at me as he's going to get the ball, and it looks like, and I'm like, I got him, and I hit second base, and I'm like, I'm running as hard as I can run, just not very fast, right? And then my jacket, I mean, everything is like,
it's like a parachute or something,
right? You know, yeah. And I'm like, shit, man, that's a long ways from second to third, you know? And I'm going to tell you something crazy. You guys got to go look. I was safe, by the way.
If only they had video review back then. That's funny.
But, you know, and I just remember just kind of like.
Well, what's the reaction when you get back to the dugout?
No, you know what was crazy was I hit my chin, you know, and I went out. I was out, like knocked out. I hit it so hard that it knocked me out. And I remember laying there like, and I got up, and Cito was there, and he said, "Bro, what are you doing?" I said, "I don't know." I don't know. It's like no one makes the third out at third base, especially with the lineup we had coming up. I was like, "What the hell am I doing, man?"
That's
you know.
right.
But it was crazy.
It was that kind of a game, though. Like
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
nuts.
Who would have thought? But
Yeah.
I mean, hey, we won.
It's funny you bring up Lenny Dykstra. You know, obviously, being a Jays fan, you cheer. You hate the Phillies because you know they're trying to get in the way of preventing the team from glory. But looking back, they were kind of they had a lot of character. Those guys had a lot of character.
For
to
sure.
them. They were really interesting ball players and stuff. And if we weren't rooting for the Jays in a weird way, they were an easy team to kind of like. 'Cause
Yeah.
They had a lot of.
They were much different than us. So we
Sure.
were kind of like the briefcase team,
Yeah.
right? It's like we showed up to do our job and do our work, and it was like afterwards, it's like close the briefcase up. And then there's the Phillies. They were rebels, right?
And they
it's
reflected
like,
their city in a lot of ways too,
oh,
right?
yeah,
Very scrappy.
Yeah. And they had this, you know, and they had the long hair. They had it all working, man. You know, and they were the partiers and everything else, and they made it work.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Before we get to some Q&As, just I do want to talk to you about the twilight of your career and what was it like to leave, and how did you deal with it?
Initially, you know, I would tell you, you know, what's so funny is people at that time, you know, they were tired of waiting on. The city of Toronto got tired of waiting on me, as far as to show up and to be something more than a 500 pitcher. And the media was tired too, and there was somebody that took over for Pat Gordash, right? I was his first move, and you got to, you know, somebody has to, whatever. And it was probably right for the club, and it was definitely the change of scenery was probably good for me. Because when you're drafted by a team and you come up through their minor league system, you got all this promise and this and that, and then they have the patience. Look, they gave it 7 years, you know. So I'm not, but I would tell you that I really thought I was going to be a Blue Jay my whole career. I really thought that. You know, I was friendly with Paul Beeston. We were close, man, beyond just being the president. And Cito was like a father figure, but in fairness, it was probably time, and you know, I went to Oakland, and you know what's crazy is my first year I'm 14-7, and I punch out 200 guys in a single season. I'm number 2 in all of baseball in strikeouts. People in Toronto was like, where the hell was that guy for 7 years? And you know, it's like, but it was just time. It was the whole process that probably had to happen. You know, some pitchers, you know, for me it was the best of Todd was after. Some guys like the David Cohns, and you know, and you think you brought in Clemens, right, and you bring in guys that were at the height of their career, or you know, where the Blue Jays got the fruits of what they did, and you know, I was the opposite. You know, I was getting better, and it's just how it turned out.
What about leaving the game? Did that prepare you in a way?
The game, you know, a lot of guys have a hard time leaving the game when they believe they still have it in them, and this is where athletes really get into trouble. They believe they still got it. Nobody wants them. For me, I'd battled some injuries in Arizona, and you know, I remember in 1999 when they told me I needed surgery, and they said, "Well, you need surgery, but you'll never pitch in the major leagues again." And I was like, "You guys are crazy." I said, "Well, I'm not doing surgery." And then 3 months later, I pitched back in a major league game. That year, went on to I actually recorded the first win in franchise history for the Diamondbacks in a playoff game, and did it all with a torn labrum, a hole in my rotator cuff. I tore the bicep tendon away from the bone, and I did all of that, and then I showed up the next spring ready to go, no surgery, worked out, just got myself in the greatest physical condition I could get in. My opening day start in Arizona, we win the game or whatever. I go 1-0, but after the game, I pitched 8 innings. After the game, I had this burning sensation in my elbow, and my ulnar nerve had subluxed out of the groove and was flopping around in my elbow. So it was like I had the ulnar nerve, I had the torn labrum, bicep tendon, hole in the cuff, and I went 8-1 to start the year. And they were projecting me to win like 24 games, and I was laughing. I was like, man, I just hope I get through the next game. Forget about the projections. And sure enough, I got to a point where the pain was so tough in 2000 that I couldn't take it anymore. And actually what really happened was my long thoracic nerve. So the nerves in my body started to shut down because I wouldn't listen to the pain of all the tears. And that was being driven really by my father, who was battling cancer. And I thought, if he can still work and be a pitching coach for the New York Yankees, have a chemotherapy bag underneath his Yankee jacket, I can certainly throw 100 pitches or 110 pitches in pain. And so it was the driver. But when I was done, it was hard to take the uniform off, because I knew that once I took that uniform off, I would never put a major league uniform on again where I was going to be asked to perform. I sat with one of my teammates, Greg Colburn, and we just sat and drank after the game, and I was in full uniform. And it took me about, I don't know, I think I called Erica, my wife, and who's here with us today, is a lot prettier than me, by the way. And I called her and I said, it's going to be a while. I think it took me 6 hours after the game to finally, and I was like, but I knew, but I was okay with it, because it was, and I was okay with it being over because I knew I couldn't do it anymore. And I was also ready that, we were newly married and having kids. I was ready, man. But I remember the first spring out of baseball, I was like, I don't know if I was really ready. Because all my buddies are coming back to spring training, the reunion, and I'm like, and I said to Eric, I said, I need to get out of town, like now. And we went to Hawaii to get away from spring training. Because it was like, and then it kind of passed, and then the second spring, I was like, hey, no big deal, you guys want to go to dinner? So.
Well, as sure a lot of us do, the players who really, really struggle and have a hard time. And I think you're testament to a true success story, and it's testament to your character and really view of the world that you're able to have a great.
Thank you.
Yeah, no. Some questions, perhaps?
Absolutely.
You guys probably have a
let's
bunch
do
of
it.
stuff that's rattling around your imagination. How do you want to do that, Sean? Just raise your hand and, yeah. Sure.
Rick Henderson joined you in 2003. He's probably my favorite ball player of all time. Just he got on base and made the rest happen. So what was he like as a teammate, I wonder?
In 93.
I'm so glad you asked that. Yeah, no, I'm so glad you asked that, because remember the 89 playoffs, right? He was like, he controlled the playoffs. And Ricky was, unique, because he was Superman. He was truly Superman out on the baseball field. When Ricky came over, I couldn't believe how good of a guy Ricky Henderson was, first of all. And I would tell you something. I don't know if you've ever heard Ricky interviewed, right? But you can prejudge his intellect by an interview. He's one of the smartest people in baseball I ever met. Like, you want to talk about number? You don't want to play a card game against Ricky Henderson, because he knows what's in your hand. I mean, it's crazy.
He's a savant.
He is so number smart, like genius. But you listen to him, and especially when he's excited, and I'm like, man, I don't have any idea what Ricky just said, right? But and then if you defined what he said, you're like, man, I still don't understand it, because he was so smart. And I got Ricky is, and then me and Ricky were in Oakland together afterwards. And he became one of my best friends on the team. And Ricky is very unique. He went on in Oakland. He went on the disabled list in 1995. And Ricky didn't take batting practice for 2 weeks. And they brought him off the disabled list. And instead of going into minor leagues and rehabilitation, Ricky was like, I'm ready. And his first day off the disabled list was a game that I pitched in Oakland. And it was a tie game. After 8, it was like 1-1, 2-2, whatever, 3-3. It doesn't matter. It was a tie game. And there's this, in the Coliseum, there's this big stairway to the locker room. So it's like, I'm finished. I'm gonna go ice up. I'm headed to the locker room, and here comes Ricky with his bat. He'd been in the locker room the whole game. And as he's walking by me, and he says, "I got you." And I'm like, I'm laughing to myself. He goes, "Bro, I got you." I said, "Okay." And I'm like, "Yeah, whatever." Ricky pinch hits and goes deep to win the game. One swing. He hadn't swung a bat in 14 days.
Amazing, amazing.
But Ricky was like unbelievable and became an extraordinary teammate, an extraordinary friend. And, playing against him once again, you look at him, you don't, and Ricky had a tendency, and if you remember watching Ricky, in the Blue Jay dugout over here, and he did it everywhere, by the way. It wasn't just to the Blue Jays, but he would always step out, and he's kind of looking like, you guys see me, right? And 24, Ricky Henderson, I'm the guy. And he wasn't really looking in the dugout, but he would kind of look above the dugout. He loved the fans, and he loved the communication and the banner. So he'd kind of look around like, does everybody see that it's Ricky Henderson now coming to the plate? And it was this thing that he did to make him as good as he did. It's like, look, I would tell you as an athlete, you kind of go into this place where you have to believe you're the best in the world. It's not even real. Like that mentality, guys, that's not even real, by the way. To think that you're the best in the world today, that's not real. But your mindset has to go there in order to compete at that level. And Ricky was the best at it. Now, what was funny is after getting to know Ricky, right? So playing against him early, he was like, he would intimidate the hell out of pitchers. But after I played with him, I was like, this guy could never intimidate me ever again. So I played against him afterwards. And it was so funny because Ricky would come to the plate, and if I wasn't starting, he would do his thing, right? And I would tell the guys in the dugout, I said, watch, I'm going to screw Ricky up. I'm waving. And I'm like, so Ricky's looking. I'm like, hey, man. Hey, Ricky. I see you, buddy. Me and you, partner. And it would screw him up. He couldn't hit then. Because he lost his mojo, right? And it was like the craziest thing.
He took away his
and he would
mojo.
get so mad, and after the game, he'd say, man, would you quit that? I said, well, quit looking over there and just get in the box. We don't care that you're hitting, but it was awesome,
Amazing.
But he's like, I'm so blessed to play with that guy. What a blessing he was.
If you don't mind a quick story, I was in the '89 playoffs. We were at the game. We were upper deck. And you just Ricky tosses the ball upper deck.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. He's awesome. Yeah, he loved the fans.
Question down front here.
Just a quick question. What possessed you to write the book that's coming out in July? Why share that kind of story, and what possessed you to finally share all that?
That's an awesome question. Somebody asked me that the other day. It's like, after all these years, why now? And first of all, I want you guys to know that there's stories, baseball stories in the book, but it's not a baseball book. So there were a lot of things that led up to that book, and there, just so you guys understand, the book is I'm going to talk about growing up in Yankee Stadium and what it meant, and I'm going to get to your question, and then I talk about the tragedy and the anger and the sadness first, the anger and the guilt of losing my little brother to leukemia when I was 15. He was 11. I gave him a bone marrow transplant that put him into a coma, and I felt like I was the killer. And it was like that, by the way, from that moment through the '93 World Series, it was after the World Series that winter that I finally went and got some help. And all of those emotional breakdowns was that anger that lived inside of me. There was an animal that was on the inside of me. So, and I didn't care where we were, by the way, or the circumstances or the consequences. Like if me and you got into a conversation and I didn't like where it was going, we ended up fighting. I was like, I didn't care. It didn't matter. I didn't, so there was this animal that lived in me, and then, so I talk about that. And by the way, I don't know if some of you probably remember that myself and Dave Stewart were caught up in a police brutality case, and nobody's ever heard the story, and I tell the story and in the book. And it's important because, we were gagged and we were never allowed to say one word. And when the case was over, we never said a word about the case. And we never laid blame on anyone, but, we got the shit beat out of us in Tampa by 26 police officers. And when I say we got the shit beat out of us, it was like they pummeled us. And I tell the story in the book. And because, any one of you, just like me, you can get caught up in a police brutality case at any moment if you're not 100% aware of your circumstances and the places you're at. And the second you think you can is the day it happens to you. And that was me. I was like, to this day, I got respect, by the way, for every first responder, because that's a tough, man, that job is so difficult and so tough, especially in the United States right now, where we've had a lot of issues, man. And I would just tell you that, and I didn't write the story for attention or anything else, and I don't even give any power to why it happened. There's no blame in it, but it happened. It was a part of my life. Now, I didn't want to write the story, in fairness, but the publisher was like, if you're going to do a book and you're going to teach people and you're going to help people, you can't leave any story out that somebody can say, why didn't you talk about that? So, look, I wrote it. I wrote about, living out the childhood dream, the tens of millions of dollars that I made as a baseball player, the money that I made after baseball, which was mirrored my baseball career, right up to 2009, the economic collapse where we were not shielded and had to start over. And I would tell you, having big money is cool, but having it and losing it is worse than never having it in the first place, And I would just tell you that my partner, my wife, my soulmate, my best friend, helped me get through one of the most difficult economic times of my life and I had the pressure on me because I'm the man of the family, man. And I was like, so I tell the story about that whole fall in the book. So there's a lot of things in there that led to really a system that I believe that if you applied the system, you can win at anything. And I've been able to use the exact same system in 4 different industries and make it to the top of the mountain in all of those industries and be able to do that. So I'm grateful and thankful. But that book really started 3 years ago now, which was 2 years ago before I wrote it. And I was with my father. My mother had called frantically. He's been battling cancer, multiple myeloma, for 16 years now. And he'd been 911 to a hospital in 4 years over 40 times. 911 wow. Over 40 times. And where every time they 911 him, we didn't know if we'd get him back out of the hospital. I mean, it was that bad. And she called, and she said, you got to get to Seattle now. And I called Erica. Erica called the airlines. I hauled ass to the airport. When I landed in Seattle, I didn't know if my dad would be living. And when I got to the hospital, he was running a fever of over 105. He didn't know what decade it was. Forget the day, forget the year. He didn't know what decade. He was so, like, when you run fevers that high, you start losing. And 3 days later, from that moment, he led our family out of the hospital. And we're all looking at each other like, how in the world? Like, he's leading the march of the family out of the hospital. And we got to his house, and he looked at me and he says, let's take a drive in the mountains. I was like, cool. So I get into his truck, he gets in the passenger seat, he guides me, and we're in Sammamish and up in the mountains in the northwest, and he's like, man, there's some beautiful homes up here, Todd. And I'm like, yeah. And I'm just listening to my father, and it was an incredible moment. And he says, Todd, he says, one day, or he said, someday, I might buy a home in these mountains. And I'm driving, and I'm like, I just want Dad, my thought was, I just want to get you through today. See, but what I realized was he wasn't given any power to his current circumstances. He wasn't given power to his illness, to the cancer, to his life. He still had all of his power, everything was on this vision of his life. And I remember thinking, like, wow, how could you even be, like, you're going to buy a house? Like, man, like, Dad, I'm just, So I got home that night, or to his house, and I'm staying in the guest bedroom. I stayed there 10 days. And I'm staring at the ceiling, and I remember staring at the ceiling like, man, shame on me. You know, I had the blessing of the greatest mother and father. I had the blessing of the greatest environments that they could put their children in. I had the blessing to go into the School of Champions with Mano, Maris, Ford, Mercer, Munson, and Yogi Berra. I played with some of the greatest and most powerful athletes in the world. I was coached and managed by the elite, by the Hall of Famers. And yet, all of this was great for me. And it was all about me. It was me, hit my goals, win my games, make my money, win my championships. Me. And I remember at that moment, I was like, how selfish am I not to share what my father has shared with me? How foolish for me not to share the relationships with the Manels and the Munsons and the Cito Gastons and the Dave Duncans and the Dave Stewarts and the Ricky Hendersons. What a shame that I don't use the people that were around me at a moment where I was suffering or where I was trying to get to another place, and the way I got there was never me, it was the collection of the people, but yet I'm not sharing it with other people, helping them. And at that moment, I remember saying that this next part of my life will not have nothing to do with me, will have everything to do with other people, and I'm going to start it by writing this book. Now, I got to tell you something. You didn't learn today that I can make up words when I speak from stage, because when there's no one here to guard what I'm going to say, right? And by the way, Dave do an awesome job, right? He's awesome, yeah, right? But, because man, you don't know where I'm going to end up when I'm talking on stage, and I can make words up, and they sound clear to me, but people are like, I don't know what he just said, you know, kind of like Ricky Henderson, you know. And I remember going home, and I get home, I'm so excited, and I tell my wife, I'm going to write a book. And she's like, oh my Lord, how are you going to write a book? Like, you can't even put a sentence together. Your grammar and this. And she goes, and people pay you to speak, and they don't even know what you're saying. And I go, yeah. I'm gonna deliver the stories, and then we'll get somebody else to figure out what I really said, and we'll come out into a book, right? So actually, I wrote the book, and I typed this way, and I typed out 52,000 words, and we put the stories together, and I had an editor go in and clean up some messes, of course, and then we hired another editor, and it's going to come out July 1st, so I want you to pre-order it today. But, you know, I really do want you to pre-order it today. Now, but there's something I want you guys to know is, like, I promise you that I am not getting rich by buying a book from Amazon. So if you ever known anyone that wrote a book, right, they probably didn't get rich writing the book, right? My message is not about me. The message is a system that was developed through other people, through my life, through tragic times, where it's the dedication to my father, it's the gift to my children, and I believe that if you have a goal, you have a dream. Well, let me say this: if you don't have a dream, you've died on your feet. So if you've stopped dreaming, if you've stopped progression in your life, if you've gotten comfortable, you're dead while you're alive. And what a shame that would be. And I would encourage you to dream like you're a child again. Look, I'm 52. I got new dreams. I got new aspirations. I've been through multiple careers. I don't know what tomorrow's going to bring. I don't know what next year. I just know that if I have a desire or a commitment in my heart and a discipline, I have a system that we built through the mentors that I've had in my life that I'm just offering. That, look, the book on Amazon is $12 and something, and it's like, you know, I'm not going to make enough to even pay for my flight to get back to the United States, all right? So I want you to order the book now. Like, we're not leaving the room. All right? I'm just kidding.
Todd's got an iPad on it.
You know.
Good place to leave it, I think, Todd.
Hey, listen,
yeah.
Look, guys, I want you to know this, that it's fun. And because of Sean, you know, and and because of a relationship that Sean and I have been building and have built, that's the reason we're here today. And you know, I'm proud that this weekend I'm going to be spending the weekend with a guy by the name of Robin Sharma, and you know, I think he's going to interview me on his stage at his Personal Mastery Academy, and so I'm sure I'll teach those people some different things. But my point is that because of Sean, I'm here, and I would just tell you that for me this was a big deal, and here's why. Because it's been so long since I've been back and been active or taken any kind of activity into the community. I didn't come back to make money, and I come back to deliver a message, and Sean's helping me deliver that message. I'm grateful to him, his friendship. I'm grateful that you guys showed up, because it would have been kind of funny, man, me doing an interview and nobody even gave a damn about what I had to say. But it's cool for me because there's so much history about my life in this city, in this country, and over the next decade, where I've maybe been missing for a couple decades, I'd like to come back and help people and not be the world champion, right? But be somebody that can grab somebody by the arm and say, we can do this and climb that mountain together. So thanks for making me feel welcome again in your country and in your city. I appreciate it.
Thanks, buddy. Awesome.